let's begin, as we have been, with a tefillah that the zchut of our learning should help to bring home all of the rest of the hostages and protect our soldiers and all of the innocents and Am Yisrael, and bring a speedy end to our wars, and also to be an Ilui Neshama for my mother, Shlomo Leah Abbas, Menachem Mendel, Rachel.
Amen.
And with that, we're going to mainly today try to just put together all the pieces of this sugya that we've been doing for the last few weeks, and I think we're in a position to do that. I was listening to the recording from last time, and I think we more or less did it. But let's review and see if we did it. So we had our Mishnah. So our Mishnah, let's get it in focus. So we had our Mishnah. So you know what? Let's do a little bit of review. So Michael Werner, why don't you read the Mishnah?
Mishachzor Bulmus mechalin oto afilu devarim tameim ad sheyoru enayv.
Okay. So what does that mean?
So somebody who's afflicted with bulmus is fed even tameh foods until his eyes light up.
Okay, so that's where we began, and skip that part, and then we got to this Breita here. So Michael Schwartz, why don't you read Tanu Rabbanan?
Tanu Rabbanan mish achuz bulmus mechinoto hakal tebel v'nivila mechin oto navila tebel v'shvi'it shvi'it tebel v'truma tanahi Titania machlin oto tebel ve'ein machlim oto truma bentema omer truma v'lo tebel amar Rava.
Okay, so let's stop there. So that's the Breita. So what does the Breita say? First translate the Breita.
Tanu Rabbanan was one that's afflicted with bulmus. We feed him food that's not allowed, but of a lesser the lesser of the punishments.
Okay.
So if you have a choice between tevov and nevila, a carcass, we feed him the carcass. If it's a choice between tevel and shvi'it, food that was after the Shemitah year, we feed him the Shemitah. And if you have a choice between tevel and truma, that's a machloket tanaim. As it says, you feed him tevel, but you don't feed him truma. And Ben Tamar says the opposite. You feed him the truma. Ben Tamar says you feed him the truma and not the tevel.
Okay, so this Breita we see it's an expansion on the Mishnah, because the Mishnah said "Machilina dvarim tmeim," which we understand to mean broadly food that's forbidden. Not necessarily that's literally tameh, but tameh in a broader sense, that it's food that's forbidden to be eaten. But for a person who's sick, specifically somebody who has bulmus, then we'll feed him. The Breita tells us we feed him dvarim tmeim, but we feed him hakal hakal. So we give him whatever is the lighter of whichever food has the lighter punishment associated with it. And then it gives us examples. So the first example is if you have tevel and nevela, those are your choices. You give him the nevela. If you have tevel and shvi'it, then you give him the shvi'it. If you have tevel and truma, then that's a machloket tanaim. It's a machloket between the Tanakama and Ventema. So Paul, we're just doing a general review because we've been away for a while and we more or less finished off the sugya last time, but I wanted to pull it all together. Okay, so
I wanted to tell you something. Just
okay.
I'm not going to be here for the next 3 weeks.
Ooh,
I'm not sure that I will be able to join the shiur,
mm-hmm.
or
Uh-huh.
not. I don't know.
Probably not. Are you leaving the country? You
Yes, we are going abroad for 3 weeks. Yes.
uh-huh. Okay. So I understand. So that as I mentioned, I'll be going away next week. I think I'll be here next Wednesday. Michael Schwartz will be here next Wednesday, but not the following Wednesday.
Maybe,
Most
maybe
likely.
not. I should be able to, but maybe.
We'll see. And Michael Werner is holding down the fort, so far as we know. Although he was interested in cheap tickets to the States, so who knows? Maybe he'll
I'm
also be true.
I'm dog sitting for the next few weeks, so
Oh, okay.
at least until as long as the dog is as long as I yeah as long as dogs sit last, I'm here.
As long as you can make the dog sit, then you're going to stay.
Very good. Yes.
Something like that. Okay. All right. So now we understand when we talk about Dorim Tameim, I understand from this Braita what we said, that it means food that's otherwise forbidden, but in order to save somebody's life, or at least to try to heal them from an extreme sickness, then we feed him things that are otherwise forbidden. And that if you have a choice, you feed him the food that has the lesser punishment associated with it. So when we get to Truma and Tevel, it's not clear because they have the same punishment applies to both of them, which is sorry, I believe is Mita B'dei Shemayim. So Truma, of course, is for a non-Kohen. If you're a Kohen, obviously, there's Tevel and Truma, obviously you give the Truma to the Kohen. But our problem is whether or not to feed them a non-Kohen, the Tevel or the Truma. And just to recap, what we understood about this is this case of the Tevel and the Truma. These are what the situation that we can imagine is that in front of us we have food that is Tevel. Right now, as it is, it's Tevel. So I have a choice. I could feed him the Tevel as is, or I could go ahead and be mafrish the Truma and the Maser, and then I could feed him the parts that he would otherwise be allowed to eat, what the Gemara is going to call chulin. Once I've removed the tevel, once I've removed the truma and the maaser, what I have left is chulin. So the question is, do I feed him tevel, or am I mafrish trumot and maasrot, and then I give him the chulin? So on this, we have Rabba's statement, Amar Rabba. So Paul, you just came in. You get to read. Hecha, but you have to unmute yourself.
Okay. To unmute. Okay.
Yes.
Hi, the dog. היכה דאפשר בחולין, דחולי עלמא לא פליגי דמתקנינן לי ומספינן לי, כי פליגי בדלא אפשר בחולין. מר סבר טבל חמור, ומר סבר תחומה חמורה. מר סבר תבל חמור, אבל תחומה חזייה לכהן. ומר סבר תחומה חמורה, אבל תבל אפשר לתיקוניה.
Litkune.
ואני בשיעור.
Okay, so stop there.
Okay.
So let's stop there. So So read this, translate this back as best you can. Okay, we've seen this a few times, hopefully. Heicha, heicha means where.
Where is it possible to eat chulin? Chuli alma.
Kulei alma. What does kulei alma mean? Anybody?
You explained it the last time, but my
Everybody.
memory is not.
It means everybody. Literally, it means kol ha'olam. Kulei alma is kol ha'olam. Ba'alma, like you say in Kaddish, ba'alma divrach yirutei.
Okay.
Right? The kulei alma,
Yes.
lo
The
plige.
whole world, there is no machloket for the whole world. The matkinan about
From matkinan, from the word litaken.
לתקן, יהיה ומוסיפנן לי.
Masfinan.
זה כנראה להוסיף, אבל פה לא להתקין.
No. Masfin, no, it's a different word. No, so but matkinan lei, everybody does not disagree. In other words, nobody argues
Yes.
that if it's possible to give him chulin, that we fix that for him. Masfinan lei. What does masfinan lei mean? Anybody?
We feed him.
We feed him. So in other words, so Rabba's addressing this point. We have in front of us Tevel, and Rabba is saying everybody agrees that if it's possible to give him chulin, then we give him chulin. In other words, we'll be metaken the Tevel, and we'll feed the chulin to him. Everybody agrees that, in other words, that would seem to be obvious, which the Gemara will pick up on, as you should recall. But right now we're taking it at face value, just saying, look, everybody agrees if you have Tevel and you can be mitakein the Tevel and you can make it into chulin, so give him the chulin. Everybody agrees with that. So what do they disagree about? In other words, this machloket that we just saw in the Breita between the Tanakama and Ben Tema, where Ben Tanakama says give him Tevel and not Truma, and Ben Tema says give him Truma, not Tevel. So what's their machloket? What are they arguing about? Obviously, they're arguing bidelo efshar b'chuli. Right? What does that mean?
This is this situation where literally one cannot feed him with chulin, meaning the chulin will not be enough.
Presumably, in this case, it means the chulin won't be enough. In other words, we can't give him just chulin. So in that case, that's their machloket. Mar savar tevel chamur, umar savar truma chamura. So one Tana holds that tevel is more chamur. Which Tana is that?
I believe Ben Tema.
So it's Ben Tema, because he says you give him truma and not tevel, and we already established that you give him hakal. You give him the lesser of the punishment, the ones that have a lesser punishment associated with them. So Ben Tema is the mar who holds tevel as chamur, and then the Tanakama is the one who holds that truma is chamura. And Gemara goes on to explain, or Rabbah goes on to explain what each of them is thinking. So why does one think that one is chamur and the other thinks that the other one is chamur? So Mar Savad Tevel chamur. So Ben Tema holds the Tevel is chamur. Why? Because aval truma chazila kohen. What does that mean?
Tevel is chamor because truma can be given. Is open is fitting for the coin.
Okay, so what does chazia mean?
Well, it comes from the root meaning seeing. So it comes from the root meaning to see. So it's like it's seeming for a coin. It's fitting. It's appropriate for a coin. A coin can eat it. I mean, basically.
Okay, I'm glad you. Okay, so you remembered that much of the lesson. So we said chazia is no, very good. Chazia is from the word chazi, which means to see, and chazia is parallel to the word in Hebrew ra'ui, which means fit. Right, so it means it's fit for the kohen. Truma is fit for the kohen. So what's the argument? Why is tevel chamor?
Tevel is chamor because it's the coin can't eat it until the truma has been separated out.
But why? Yeah, but why is it more chamor than truma?
Because truma is not forbidden to everybody. It's only forbidden.
Oh,
It's only forbidden to people who are not kohanim.
right. In other words, tevel is chamor because no one is allowed to eat it. But the truma, a kohen, it's fit for a kohen to eat. So what are we saying? What's the point of the svara? We can't argue that tevel or truma has a more chamur punishment because they both have the same punishment. If you eat tevel or if you eat truma and you're not a kohen, you're chayav the same punishment. So we have to figure out another tzad chumra. We have to figure out another way of saying that one is more chamur. So Rabbah says that Ben Tema is going to say that tevel is chamor because no one is allowed to eat it. But truma, there is a heter, and the heter is for the kohen, but it means in the world that it has some kind of a tfisa of heter. There's some kind of a concept of heter that's associated with truma. It's been removed from this category of being completely forbidden. Umar Savar, okay, and the Tanakama holds that truma is chamura. Why? Because aval tevel efshar litkune. Tevel, it's possible to fix it. Fixing it here means what?
To do the separation.
By doing the separation, by doing the hafrasha.
The hafrasha, okay.
Right? So what is the Tanakama's understanding? Why is truma chamura?
A truma is chamura because it can't be fixed. There's nothing one can do to change its status.
Okay, and because it can't be fixed, it will never be permitted to anyone except for a kohen. Right? But tevel, it's possible to fix it, meaning I can do the hafrasha, and thereby I can make most of it permitted to anybody. By doing the hafrasha, I'll take away the truma, I'll take away the maaser, and then anybody can eat it. Kohen, Levi, Yisrael, Don Yisrael, anybody can eat that. So, okay. Each time we do this, I say we could talk about this more, but I think we'll leave it. It's an interesting contrast of svarot, right? Because the svarot that Rabbah is offering for Ben Tema, that tevel is chamur, but truma is chazia kohen, I could understand that to be an argument based on its reality right now, whereas the svara that's given for the Tanakama is based on a reality in potentia. It's not what it is now, but it has the potential of being X, of it being mutar. So that in itself is an interesting machloket, but we'll leave it as we've just said it. Okay, so now that's the statement of Rabbah. At this point, the Gemara comes and starts to challenge Rabba's statement. So just to, again, to keep everything in order, we have a Mishnah that says if somebody has bull moose, that we feed him a few dvarim tmeim. And then we have a Braita that says when you do have to feed somebody dvarim tmeim, you feed him hakal hakal. You feed him whatever has the lesser punishment associated with it. And if you end up with the case of tevel or truma, then there's a machloket. At that point, there's a machloket because we'll have the Tanakama who says it's better to give him truma. We'll have Ben Taimah says it's better to give him tevel. Did I get that backwards? I think I did. Tanakama because the Gemara flips the order that we talk about them. It's the Tanakama holds we give him tevel and not truma. Ben Taimah says we give him truma and not tevel. Okay, and we have a reason. Each one of them we can supply a reason for why they say what they do. So at this point, the Gemara challenges Rabba's initial statement. What was his initial statement? When it's possible to give him chulin, nobody disagrees that we fix the tevel and we give him chulin. That's his opening statement. Everybody agrees with that. So on that, Michael Schwartz, you're going to pick up from here. Efshar b'chulin.
Efshar b'chulin peshita. No, tzricha b'shabbat. B'shabbat nami peshita. Tiltul midrabanan hu. Hacha b'mai askinen be'etzit she'enu nakuv derabanan. Mar savav tevel chamor v'mar savar truma chomara.
Okay, so explain this. Efshar b'chulin pshita.
So if you can, what it's saying is if you could turn the truma into chulin, it's obvious that that's what you would feed them. And the objection is no, you need to say it because on Shabbat you can't take truma maser.
Okay, so wait, stop, and let's just flesh that out a little bit more. So Efshar b'chulin pshita. So this is a challenge to Rabbah. Rabbah says everybody agrees if you can give him chulin, you give him chulin. So Gemara is saying obviously, like there's no chidush. I don't need Rabbah to tell me that you give him that which is mutar. Everybody agrees that chulin is mutar. Of course, you're going to give him that which is mutar. So that's the pshita, obvious. And anytime we say pshita, pshita is a kasha. In other words, if it's saying this is obvious, and therefore what? I don't need the Gemara to tell me this. So the Gemara says, no, I need it for the case of Shabbat, which, as you correctly say, what's the problem with Shabbat?
One can't take truma maser.
So now, once I say lo tzricha b'Shabbat, so what's the implication? How am I reading Rabbah now? What changed? How did the Gemara said pshita? So the Gemara wants to answer by saying, no, it's not pshita because Shabbat. So now, how am I reading this initial statement differently than I read it before?
Rabba's assumption is that you have the no, because no, I'm sorry, take that back.
It's okay, you didn't say anything, so you don't have to take it back. So until now, what did we assume when we say pshita? We're saying, Rabbah is saying if you can take trumot and masrot from tevel and give him chulin, obviously that's what you do. So now I say no, I need Rabbah's statement because what if this happens on Shabbat? So what would I think if it happens on Shabbat that all I have in front of me is tevel? What would I think is the din?
Oh, that you could go ahead and feed him the tevel without taking truma maser.
So maybe, yeah, in other words, I'll say, listen, it's Shabbat. I can't take because there's an Isur Shvut, right? There's an Isur D'Rabbanan that I'm not allowed to be mafrish Trumot and Masrot on Shabbat. So then I would think, okay, so in that case, I'm going to give him tevils. But comes Rabbah, and Rabbah says, no, everybody agrees that you fix it. In other words, you do the hafrasha and you feed him. Meaning now what? Meaning even on Shabbat. So that's the chidush. That's what Rabbah's being mechadesh. He's telling me that even on Shabbat, everybody agrees that you would still take the trumot and maasrot and feed him. That's what I get from this line. Lo tzricha b'Shabbat. I need what? I need Rabbah's statement. When I say pshita, pshita is telling me I don't need Rabbah's statement. It's obvious. So Gemara says, no, tzricha. I still need Rabbah's statement for the case of Shabbat, where otherwise I would have thought that I don't take Trumotu Masrot, that I would just give him Tavel. And Rabbah says, no, everybody agrees that even on Shabbat, you should be Mafrish Trumotu Masrot and give him Chulin, right? That's what he says. If you can, you give him Chulin, even on Shabbat. So then the Gemara says, B'Shabbat nami pshita, tiltul midrabananhu. So what does that mean?
So the prohibition against taking Maser and Truma on Shabbat is also D'Rabbanan.
It's only D'Rabbanan. We haven't yet had another D'Rabbanan. So this is we are introducing, although you're right, and it's because right now we're introducing the idea that Hafrashat Trumot and Masrot on Shabbat is an Isur Shvut, it's an Isur D'Rabbanan. Hold on a second. Excuse me. And since it's an Isur D'Rabbanan, so then I'll say obvious. So then that's also obvious. In other words, what's the challenge? Rabbah's statement is still not a chidush. In other words, I don't need Rabbah to tell me that I would violate this Isur Shvut in order to keep somebody from eating an Isur Dioraita, right? Because eating the Tevel is an Isur Dioraita. So, and I do have to feed him because I have an overriding concern for his health. So that's going to override the prohibition against eating, let's say, Tavel. It's going to override eating Dvarim Tameim. So on Shabbat, so now what is what is Rabbah saying? We wanted to say that Rabbah is saying when it's possible to give him chulin, even on Shabbat, everybody agrees that you're mafrish trumot and maasrot on Shabbat, and you feed him. So Gemara says, obviously that's true, because the whole isur of being mafrish trumot and maasrot on Shabbat is only an isur d'Rabbanan, and obviously if I need to feed him, I'll be over on the Isur D'Rabbanan in order to keep him from eating an Isur D'Oraita. So at this moment, I still don't understand what was the chidush of Rabbah that I couldn't have figured out myself. Right? That's where we are in the Gemara. What did Rabbah tell me that was such a big chidush that I couldn't have figured it out myself? So the Gemara answers, Hacha b'maya skinan. What do those words mean?
Here, what's the case that we're dealing with?
What are we dealing with? And what's the case we're dealing with? Batzit sheino nakuv d'Rabbanan. So what does that mean?
An produce that's from an unperforated pot is prohibited only D'Rabbanan.
Right. In other words, the tevel that would come from produce that's grown in an atzit sheino nakuv, an unperforated pot, that tevel is an isur d'Rabbanan. It's asur to eat it d'Rabbanan. Mar savar tevel chamur, umar savar truma chamura. These two lines are a little bit superfluous, but the point is, Vatzit sheino nakuv durabanan. So now how do I read Rabbah? We're going to say Rabbah now reads as follows. When it is possible to give this person with bulmus chulin, even on Shabbat, and even from even produce that was grown in an atzitz sheino nakuv, everybody agrees, I'm still mitakein, and I still feed him, despite the fact that the hafrasha itself is an isur d'Rabbanan, and the isur of eating the tevel is only d'Rabbanan. So, but nonetheless, everyone agrees that you still have to be mafrish the trumot and masrot before you give it to him. Why is that? Rashi supplies the answer. Rashi supplies the answers. Batzit sheino nakuv detevel shalom d'Rabbanan ushvut hafrashat masrot b'Shabbat d'Rabbanan. Right, the tevel of the atzit sheino nakuv is an isur d'Rabbanan, and the isur of being mafrish trumot masrot on Shabbat itself is d'Rabbanan. Hashmeinan, so it comes to teach us, in other words, Rabbah's statement that says, everybody says you have to be mafrish trumot masrot, it teaches us that we're going to be we push away the shvut. That is, we ignore the shvut, and we, as it were, and we do the hafrasha. And v'lo yachilu tevel d'Rabbanan. And when I don't give him even tevel d'Rabbanan. Why not? Rashi adds the reason. Ta'atu lemishrei nami tevel d'oraita ki hai gavna. Now, does anybody remember what these words mean?
Because if you feed them the tevel d'Rabbanan, there's a fear that people will come and permit tevel the deraita, a real Torah prohibition.
That's the mashma'ut. That's the implication of the words. What do the words literally mean? Da'atu.
They will come to permit also tevel from the Torah in when a similar case.
Yeah, ki hai gavna. In like this case, you know, in English we have a word, not in English. In Hebrew we have the word kigon. What does kigon mean?
Example.
Yeah, for example, like, right? Kigon is
likewise in English.
Okay, so kigon is a contraction of these words, kigavna. It's a contraction from the Aramaic. Kigon is kigavna, or the expanded version, ki hai gavna, like this case, like, as you might say, likewise. Well, actually, it doesn't always mean likewise. Kigon usually means, for example. So it's a little bit different. But nonetheless, Michael Schwartz, very good. So, so the reason is, despite the fact that the tevel from an atzitz sheino nakuv is an isur d'Rabbanan, despite the fact that it's Shabbat and being mafrish trumot masrot from anything is only an isur, even tevel d'oraita is only an isur d'Rabbanan, that everybody agrees, both Ben Tema and Tanakama agree that nonetheless, you're still mafrish the trumot and masrot even on Shabbat, even from tevel d'Rabbanan. Why? Because we're afraid that if a similar situation arose with tevel d'oraita, where we wouldn't be matir, where maybe we won't be matir, then we tell you have to. In other words, that tevel d'oraita, we would certainly tell you have to be mafrish the trumot and masrot. So we tell you have to do it also in the d'Rabbanan. It's a Gzeira. All right, it's a gader. Okay, so now we understand. That's what Rabbah means. This is what the Gemara concludes that Rabbah means. When Rabbah said, "Heichadef Shabbat when it's possible to give him chulin, it meant in all cases, even when the tevel is derabanan, and even if it's on Shabbat, and even if it's the tevel is derabanan, everybody agrees that you have to be mafrish the trumot to masrot, and then you give him chulin. And the only time they'll disagree is when it's not possible to give him chulin. Okay, we'll come back to that. All right, so then at that point, we got to, now this is the part we read last time. Lema Tanaihi. Paul, are you still with us? Maybe not. Michael Werner, Lema Tanaihi.
Lema Tamahi. Tanahi. The Tanya. Mishen
Nishacha.
Nishacho Nachash Korin lo Rofe Mimakom Lemakom U Makriin lo Et Hatanagolet Begogozazin lo Et Hachrishim Machlin oto Ve'en Zarich Leaser Divrei Rabbi. Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Shimon Omer, Lo Yoyachel Ad Sheyeh Ashar.
Ad She.
As
Ad She.
Yaser.
Yaser. Right?
Yaser.
Ad She Yaser. Okay, so explain. So what does Lema Tanaihi mean?
So something that this is like
Michael Schwartz, what does Lema Tanaihi mean?
Let us say that this is a machloket among Tanaim.
Let us say. Lema is let us say. And we emphasized this a lot last time and even the previous time. What is so as a key word, as a term that the Gemara uses, lema, whenever the Gemara uses lema, it says let us say. Does anybody remember what I told you about that? Lema? When does the Gemara use that?
If I remember correctly, it's introducing a counter argument, introducing an argument against something that was said earlier.
Well, it's what I said specifically is lema, right? The word lema is going to indicates to me that I'm going to set up a challenge to what you just said that I intend to knock down, that I intend myself to knock down. Right? Earlier we had the term tanaihi, right? When the tevel truma tanaihi, tevel and truma, that's a machloket tanaim. We didn't say lema tanaihi. Why not? Because here we knew for certain that this is a machloket tanaim. When I say lema tanaihi, I'm saying let us say that this is a machloket tanaim. I'm introducing uncertainty. Let's say, in other words, I can say, why don't we say that this is a machloket tanaim? And then I have to bring a machloket tanaim, which I'm going to insist, or I'm going to not insist, but I'm going to put forth as demonstrating the proposition that this is a machloket tanaim. And then I'm going to push it down. I'm going to say, no, it's not a machloket tanaim. The lema means I'm going to introduce something that looks like a machloket, and then I'm going to push it away. So that's just to try to pound into you about how to read Gemara. Lema Tanaihi. So Titania, just a second. So let's say that this is a machloket Tanaim. What is the Gemara proposing is a machloket Tanaim?
It was Rabba's statement that all agree that when it's possible to take chulin, that one should take when it's possible to take Maser and Truma, then one should do it and then give it to the patient, give it to the sick person.
Right. In other words, what we're saying is we just now went through this process of understanding Rabbah on a deeper level. And our conclusion was that Rabbah holds that Ben Tema and the Tanakama of the previous brisa both hold that if you have tevel, even if the tevel is midrabanan, and it's on Shabbat, and you have to feed somebody who has bulmus, that you nonetheless take the trumot and masrot before you feed them chulin. That's Rabbah. Rabbah says everybody holds that. So now the Gemara says, no, lema tanaihi. Let's say that conclusion that you placed on Rabbah, maybe that itself is a machloket tanaim. Maybe not all tanaim agree with this. Titania, because I learn in this, because I learn in a Braita. So now, Michael Werner, so explain this. Mishin Ashachon Nachash.
Somebody who is bitten by a snake, we call a doctor for him from place to place, meaning even beyond the Tehom, presumably. And we tear open the tarnagolet, which supposedly, I guess, would be some fulcrum, some revenue. And we pick leeks for him.
We cut, literally means goes like cut. Right. We cut leeks for him, and what?
And we feed him, and we don't need to take the matanot.
Okay, Divrei Rebbe. And what does Rabbi Yozar Rabbi Shimon say?
We don't feed him until we hafresh the produce, the leeks.
Okay. Lo yochel, right. So literally, he should not eat until Maser is taken. So the Gemara says, and the Gemara now is going to articulate the question. Nema Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Shimon he below Rabbi. So let's say that it goes like Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Shimon and not like Rabbi. That what goes like Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Shimon?
The above argument. That probably especially the leaks, and I would say
Wait. What I'm just repeating. We asked the question when we said lema tanaihi. So we defined that question. What was the question? Let's say this is a machloket tanaim. Let's say what is a machloket tanaim?
That if it's possible to take out the chulin, then we've given the chulin.
Okay, and even what? Even when what?
But we even on Shabbat, and even if it's from perforated pot.
Very good. In other words, so let's say that's a machloket tanaim, and now we say nema. So let's say Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Shimon he. let's say it's like Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Shimon. What is like Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Shimon?
The idea that we feed that we feed this sick person chulin even on Shabbat. We take out chulin even on Shabbat, even from a perforated pot.
Right. In other words, we take out you mean the Trumot Masot, but yes, right. In other words, so let's say the conclusion that we had with Rabbah, let's say that actually only goes according to Rabbi Yazar Rabbi Shimon, and not like Rabbi. Why would I say that?
Because Rebbe says that you don't need to take Maser.
Rabbi says you don't need to take Maser. Ein tzarich la'aser. He literally says you don't have to take Maser. So that's our question. Why didn't I? So, 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 uh, so that's our question. Maybe Rabba's statement, which we concluded the way Michael Werner summed up, that we're talking about Shabbat, even on Shabbat, even with produce from the tzitz she'eino nakuv, that you still have to take out Trumot Masor before you feed him. Now I have Rebbe who says in a similar case, again, because I'm feeding somebody who is in dire need of having food, specifically kreshin, and Rebbe says you don't have to take maaser before you give it to him. So the Gemara answers afilu tema Rebbe. All right, so Michael Schwartz, you can read afilu tema Rebbe.
Afilu tema Rebbe, adkan lo kamar Rebbe, hatam, ela, le'inyan ma'aser yirak derabanan. Aval ma'aser dagan, the table deraitahu, afilu Rebbe modeh de'i sharit le be'atzit she'enu nakuv, ati lemichal ba'atzit shehu nakuv.
Good. So can you explain all that?
Okay, so you can even say that it goes as Rebbe, because until here, Rebbe did not say there, and rather only with the Indian dealing with Maser for Maser for Yerok, the Derabanan, for Maser for vegetables that are only required for Derabanan. But for those, but the Maser Dagan, which is from the Torah, then Rebbe would not have Rebbe would not say that.
Right. And then what would he say? Afilu Rebbe modeh.
So even Rebbe would also acknowledge that it is not permitted to take.
No, well, de'i sharit le. E here means if.
If okay, so if one is permitted to take to eat produce from a pot that's not perforated without taking maser, people will come and eat from produce of a pot that is perforated without taking maser.
Shkayach. Okay. So in other words, so this is the conclusion. So we say, so as we said, we set this up in order to knock it down. So we're gonna say, on the face of it, I would think that Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Shimon holds like Rabbah, holds like the conclusion of Rabbah, because he says that when you need to feed kreshin to a sick person, that you don't have to take maaser. I'm sorry, that when you have to feed kreshin to a sick person, you do, right, he's not allowed to eat until you take maaser. And that's like the conclusion I had with Rabbah. And Rebbe seems to say that you don't have to take Maaser. So name a Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Shimon, and not Rabbi. So let's say, so now we say afilu tema Rabbi, even if you'll say Rabbi, even if you'll say that Rabba's statement is also going to apply universally and include even Rebbe. So how can that be? Because Rebbe said that you don't need to take Maser. So what we're going to do is we're going to be very medayek in Rebbe's statement, and we'll say Ad Kan Lo Ka'amar Rebbe Hatam, until here. In other words, until this point in the argument, Rebbe didn't say there, right? Hatam is there, and there is where?
There is this baraita about the person who gets bit by a snake.
Right. So the there is the second bright I bought. That's, in other words, it's out there, and it's not the sugya of bulmus. It's there. It's outside of the sugya of bulmus. So it's over there in this brighta that we brought. So Rebbe didn't say over there about the person who got bit by a snake and we feed him kreshin even without taking maser. He only said that linyan maser yerek durabanan. He only said that because we were talking about giving him kreshin, and taking maser from kreshin, which is yerek, is only a chiyuv durabanan. But maser dagan, the tevel deoraitahu, when we come to dagan, which is tevel that the Torah itself dictates, afilu Rebbe modeh, even Rebbe will acknowledge, and he will agree with the conclusion of Rabbah, that if we permit him to eat tevel from an atzitz she'eino nakuf, if we let him eat tevel dioraita, that is, so this is it's a very fine point, because I'm going to step outside for a second and let's just define the terms here, because we have diraita and Rabbanan sort of getting kicked around here. We have, if we were to set it up in a more pristine way, this is what we would say. The normal case of tevel, let's say, is going to be dagan. It's going to be grain that grows in the ground. Everybody holds that's tevel dioraita. If you grew grain from the ground, that's tevel dioraita. And as a nispach to that, as like an addendum to that, I'll say that would also hold true if you grew tevel, if you grew grain in an atzitz shenakuv, right? A atzitz that has a hole in it. That's the same as growing it in the ground. If I grow vegetables in the ground or in an atzitz shenakuv, that tevel is durabanan. So in the most, let's say in the, I'll call it the simple case, right? The straightforward case is when you're growing things in the ground. When you grow things in the ground, we distinguish between grain that's grown in the ground, dagan, and vegetables that are grown in the ground. That the Torah dictates that you have to take trumot and masrot from grain, but the Torah doesn't tell us that we have to take trumot and masrot from vegetables that are grown in the ground. Okay. Then I have this funny case, right, of the atzitz she'eino nakuv. What if I grow produce in a pot that doesn't have a hole? So then, no matter what I grow, the resultant tevel is only going to be an isur d'Rabbanan. That is, there'll only be a chiyuv d'Rabbanan to take tevel, to take trumot and masrot from tevel that was grown in an atzitz she'eino nakuv, right? Because it's not touching the ground. It doesn't get any nourishment from the ground because it's cut off, right? There's no hole in the bottom of the pot. So at that point, though, you might think that there's no point in distinguishing between grain and vegetables, right? Because either way, the resultant tevel is not chayav trumot masrot dioraita. Is everybody following me? So far, so good? Okay. So I'm just going to review it, partly to keep it straight in my own head, but partly because the conclusion that we're going to get here, it's a very fine conclusion. It's not a sweeping conclusion. You'll see what I mean, I think, in a moment. So, so what's our problem? Our problem is we have this guy, he has bulmus, and maybe it's Shabbat, and maybe the only tevel that I have was grown in a tzitz sheino nakuv. So Rabbah says, look, in such a case, you still take the trumot and masrot, even though there isn't a chiyuv d'oraita to take trumot and masrot from tevel that comes from a tzitz sheino nakuv, and I'll push away the isur of taking trumot and masrot on Shabbat in order to save this guy's life. Now I have Rebbe Elazar. I have Rebbe who says that if you have to feed somebody whose life is in danger, you can give him kreshin, and you don't have to take trumot and masrot. So the question, I mean, if I could set this question up a little bit different and say, why not? Like, why would that be different than the case we just described of the guy with bulmus, where we said that we don't feed him tevel, we take trumot and masrot. So the Gemara is answering that by saying that when Rebbe said you don't have to give him trumot, you don't have to take the trumot and masrot before you feed him kreshin, that's because the maaser that you would take is altogether d'Rabbanan. That is what? That because the ikar din of taking the trumot and masrot is not dictated at all by the Torah. It's different than the case of Rabbah. Rabbah didn't specify what the tevel was. That is, he didn't tell us whether it was Dagan or whether it was Yerek. So I have to assume that Rabbah's case, which is the case of the Braita, which is the case of the Mishnah, includes all kinds of tevel, including Dagan, which has a chiyuv d'oraita. So, ad kan lo kamar Rebbe Hatam. Rebbe didn't say what he said there in the Braita, except regarding taking maaser for Yerek, which is altogether a chiyuv d'Rabbanan. And so he says, in that case, I can ignore the chiyuv d'Rabbanan and just give him the kreshin without taking maaser. But if we asked Rebbe, what if the cure to give this person is Dagan, and let's say it's Shabbat and so forth, or even if it's not Shabbat, Ava maaser Dagan de tevel d'oraitahu. But when the maaser that I'm taking is from Dagan, it's from grain, where the tevel has a status that requires me to take trumot masrot midioraita, there even Rebbe will acknowledge that if I allow you to give him if I allow you to give him tevel from produce that was grown in atzitz sheino nakuv, which is altogether an isur is only a chiyuv d'Rabbanan, even if it's dagan. right? Even dagan that's grown in atzit sheino nakuv is only a chiyuv to Rabbanan to give him the tevel. If I let you do that, ati lemecha batzit shu nakuv, he will come later to eat tevel, the oraita, from an atzit sheino nakuv, shehu nakuv. So what comes out? That it's still true. I want to try to simplify this, but I want to point this out. The Gemara isn't saying that Rebbe changed his mind. What Rebbe said, Rebbe still holds. He holds that if you have somebody who needs to be fed kreshin, that you give him the kreshin, even without taking maaser. But what won't he say? He would not say that if you have to feed somebody dagan, even from an atzit sheino nakuv, he wouldn't say that you give it to him without taking maaser. And so, according to so now, what have I accomplished? So I can say that when the Gemara concluded that when Rabbah said, that is according to not only the Tanakama and Ben Tema of our Braita, it will also be true for Rabbi Elazar and Rabbi Shimon, and it will even be true for Rabbi in the case of Dagan. In the case of Dagan, he will still say that everybody will hold that you still have to be mafrish trumot and maasrot from Dagan, even if the Dagan came from an atzitz sheino nakuv. Because why? Because I'm afraid that if not, if I let you give it to him without taking trumot and maasrot, that later on, in a similar case, he'll come to eat dagan. He'll come to eat dagan from an atzitz shehu nakuv. So I'm just going to read Rashi here. So this was where the Gemara said, "Lema tanai." Lema hadirabba. Let's say that which Rabbah said, hadirabba, that which is attributed to Rabbah. Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Shimon, he. Let's say it only goes according to Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Shimon. Why? Because damar mafrishin lo truma b'Shabbat. Because Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Shimon says you do take the maaser for the guy that you're feeding kreshin even on Shabbat. V'al yachilu tevel d'Rabbanan, and you don't feed him tevel d'Rabbanan, kigon yerek, like the kreshin, like the vegetables of the Braita. And let's say that what Rabbah said, that would agree with Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Shimon, below Rebbe, but it would not agree with Rebbe. Di Rebbe, ha'amar ein sarich la'aser, because Rebbe says explicitly you don't have to take la'aser. The Gemara answered, Ad kan lo kamar Rebbe el inyan ma'aser yerek d'Rabbanan. Rebbe only said that you can give him the kreshin because the maaser that you take from it is only a chiyuv d'Rabbanan. Let somebody else read this, and then we'll hash it out. Michael Werner, why don't you take a stab? Delo?
Delo, michlaf, betevel doraita. Aval dagan doraita, who afil Rabbi model la'af atzitz she'enu naku ma'aser de michlaf doraita.
Okay. pretty good reading. And let's see if you can translate this word. Delo mechlaf. What would mechlaf mean?
That you don't um
This would be like herchlif, machlif in Hebrew.
so you don't um I'm sorry,
Okay, Michael Schwartz, what would that mean?
Yeah, I'm not sure.
Okay, delo mechlaf, you wouldn't, okay, literally means that you wouldn't exchange it, but it means that you wouldn't, like, in this case, it means that you wouldn't, mechlaf b'tevel dioraita, you wouldn't, mechlaf here can mean to exchange or to substitute or to switch. In other words, that you won't come to, there's a word that keeps, it's like running in and out of my head. The lo mechlaf b'tevel dioraita. You wouldn't, um, I can say mistake, but the lo mechlaf b'tevel dioraita. You won't. Um, okay, it means that you wouldn't make the mistake of thinking this is like tevel dioraita, right? Literally means that you wouldn't exchange it with tevel dioraita. Later on I'll think of the word. I'll try to send it out to you. But in any event, what he's saying is this. Adkan, right? He quotes the Gemara. Rashi quotes the Gemara. Adkan lo kamar Rabbi Elin and Maser Durabanan. Rabbi only was talking about not taking Maser from vegetables, which is a chiyuv durabanan, because there you won't come to make the mistake and say that the same din applies to tevel dioraita. In other words, all Rebbe said is you don't have to take maser from kreshin because he wasn't worried that a person for whom you let them take that you don't have to take maser from kreshin in this extreme case. He's not afraid that somebody will think, oh, now all teva will be mutar in the same circumstance. People won't come to substitute the case of tevel, which is tevel dioraita, like dagan, with the case of kreshin that are only yerek and only midrabanan. About dagan dioraita, dagan taking trumot and masrot from dagan, that's a chiyuv dioraita. Afilu Rebbe modeh, even Rebbe acknowledges the af be'atzit sheinonaku. Even in an atzit sheinonaku, maaser, you have to take the maaser. Even in an atzit sheinonaku, where even for dagan, the chiyuv is only midirabanan, right? It's atzit sheinonaku. There's only a chiyuv durabanan to take the maaser from the dagan, but nonetheless, he says maaser, the mechlaf b'dioraita, because there you would make the mistake. In other words, according to the way the Gemara is understanding, because this is why I laid this out before in terms of the dioraisas and the rabbanan, right? So the dioraisa din is if you have dagan that grows in the ground or grows in a tzitz shenakuv, then midioraita you have to take trumot masrot. And contrast to that, I have yerek, which if it grows in the ground, even when it grows in the ground, the Torah doesn't say you have to take trumot masrot. You only have to take a midrabanan. If I put either or both of those things into an atzitz she'eino nakuv, then taking trumot masrot is altogether midrabanan, even for dagan. But according to the conclusion of the Gemara, Rebbe, like Rabbah and the way Rabbah understood the other Tanaim, they will all be concerned that if we let you eat dagan that was grown in an atzitz she'eino nakuv, without taking trumot u'masrot, that you will come to eat dagan that was grown either in the ground or in atzitz shenakuv, when it will be dioraita. I don't have the same fear about letting you eat yerek. Rebbe says I don't have that same fear about letting you eat yerek that was grown in an atzitz sheino nakuv, because in essence it's a durabanan mi durabanan, or it's that even if it grew in the ground, the chiyuv of taking trumot u'masrot is durabanan. And if it's an atzitz she'eino nakuv, it's a durabanan or durabanan. So I don't make you take that out. I'm not worried about that case. But if I let you eat the gan without taking trumot u'masrot, even when the chiyuv is only durabanan, there I'm worried that you will make the mistake of eating tevel of the gan when it's a chiyuv dioraita. The difference between the kreshin and the dagan is when they're both grown in atzitz she'eino nakuv, so they're both tevel durabanan. The difference is that there is a case of dagan which will be dioraita. That's the atzitz shenakuv, or if it's grown in the ground. The kreshin will never get to a point where there will be a chiyuv dioraita. So Rebbe says, if it's kreshin, I'm not going to be machmir, even though Rebbe Elazar Rebbe Shimon says, no, I'll still be machmir. In terms of the conclusion of the Gemara here, the Gemara wants to say that we want to include Rebbe as much as possible in the conclusion of Rabbah. And so what will come out, halacha lema'aseh? Okay, let's summarize now. What will be the practical outcome of the halacha? So let's say, we'll go back to Rabbah's case. You have a guy who has bulmus, and even on Shabbat, and even if the only food you have is tevel that grew in an atzitz she'eino nakuv. So you might think that, like Michael Schwartz said earlier, you might think you just give him that everybody would hold you give him tevel, because there's a shut to tell me not to be mafrish trumot u'masrot. Plus, the tevel itself is only tevel midirabanan. And the chidush of Rabbah is that no, af al pi chen, we make you take the trumot u'masrot, and everybody agrees that you take trumot u'masrot and you give him chulin when the chulin will be sufficient. And then having introduced Rebbe Elazar, Rebbe Shimon, and Rebbe, so now I'll say, okay, there will be a distinction, there will be a machloket in the end between Rebbe Elazar, Rebbe Shimon, and Rebbe, if what you're feeding this person is yerek, and the yerek itself was grown in an atzitz she'eino nakuv, Rebbe will say you don't have to take the maaser, because there the chiyuv of taking it is a durabanan on a durabanan, right? Because it was food that was grown in an atzitz she'eino nakuv, and it was yerek, which is altogether a chiyuv durabanan to take the trumot u'masrot. But even Rebbe will be modeh that if what you have to feed the person is dagan, even when the dagan was grown in an atzitz she'eino nakuv, where in principle the chiyuv of taking the trumot u'masrot is a chiyuv derabanan, even Rebbe will be modeh. He will acknowledge that you still have to. Then you do have to take the trumot u'masrot, because it's a gzeira that I'm afraid that if I don't make you take the trumot u'masrot, that if you're confronted with a similar case, and the dagan that you have was grown in an atzitz shehu nakuv, or certainly if it was grown in the ground, that I'm afraid then you wouldn't take trumot maser, but there you would have to take the trumot maser because there it's a chiyuv d'oraita to take it. That's a very long-winded conclusion, but that's our conclusion. I will not make you repeat it back to me.
Thank you.
Except it strikes me, and maybe this is
Yeah.
reading too much in, that Rebbe's opinion here goes back to the Tanakama, the reasons why the Tanakama permitted Truma earlier on, in the sense that the Tanakama permitted Truma because because of potentiality, whereas Rebbe is prohibiting Dagan that's in a tzitz she'enu nakum also because of potentiality.
No, but there's a different. There are different. We're talking about different potentialities.
No, we're talking about different potentialities. Exactly, we're talking about different potentialities, but there are arguments that both hinge on potentiality.
No, but you have to distinguish because we're not talking about the same type of potentiality. And let me explain. I'll explain why. And see if this makes sense to you. When we learned the Braita of the Tanakama and Bentema, so when Rava was learning that, and he said Mar Savar Truma Chamura, Mar Savar Tevel Chamur, Mar Savar Tevel Chamur, Mar Savar Truma Chamura, Mar Savar Tevel Chamur, right? So this is Bentema, who says that you feed Truma and not Tevel, but Truma Chazil Kohen. In other words, if you have a choice between right now giving him Tevel or Truma, give him the Truma. Because right now the Truma has a heter in the world, even if it doesn't have specific heter for this person. And what I said about the second part was Marasavar Truma Chamura. This is the Tanakama. Tanakama says Truma's Chamura. So rather you should give him the Tevel. Why? Because of Charlotte Kune. Because in principle it could be made mutar for everybody. It's not an inevitability, but it's a possibility. There's a potential to make it mutar for everybody. When I'm talking here about a gzeira, the gzeira is, it's not saying that the potentiality here, it's not potential. I'm worried about a case that might arise. It's not about what's in front of me now, and what is in front of me now could be something else. Because what's in front of me now in the machloka between Rebbe and Rebbe Ozar, Rebbe Shimon, is only Kreshin. That's all that's in front of me. Goes azin lo et Kreshin. So I look at Rebbe. Rebbe says I don't have to give him maaser. I don't have to take the maaser before I give him the Kreshin, because there's as I say, it's a d'Rabbanan al d'Rabbanan, right? Because in the case of Kreshin that were grown in Natzitz Sheino Nakuv, that's a chiyuv d'Rabbanan, and Kreshin are altogether only a chiyuv d'Rabbanan for Trumot and Masra. And the Gemara is claiming what is Rebbe concerned about? He's not concerned about what will happen in the future if you're confronted again with Kreshin, because he says stam you can go zin lo to Kreshin machuyinota ein tzarich la'aser. He doesn't differentiate actually between whether it's an atzitz shenakuv or atzitz sheino nakuv, because he doesn't care. It's all together midrabanan. But he would care. The fact that he only says it about Kreshin indicates to me that he would agree that if what you have to feed him is Dagan, then he would be Makpid, even if it was Dagan that only had a Chiyuv D'Rabbanan. What would that be? That would be Dagan that was grown in Natzitz Sheino Nakuv. because he'll be worried about the case, which is not it's not a potential based on what's in front of me right now. It's a case that could happen in the future. When I talk about the tevel having potential, I mean the tevel that's in front of me right now, I could make it takun. I could make it mutar for anybody to eat. Masha'en ken, with dagan, I'm not talking about whether I can make this dagan mutar or not. I'm talking about I'm being gozer because of I'm being gozer the case of dagan that was grown in that tzitchen and akuv. I'm being gozer because of the case of the dagan that was grown in that tzitz shenakuv. So when I talk, the word potential here is not an operative word. I'm talking, I use that word very specifically in the first case, potential, because the tevel in the first case could itself potentially be mutar. Here I'm not talking about whether or not these kreshim could be mutar or not mutar. Because actually they could be mutar, because you could take the maser. It's just the Rebbe says you don't have to. You don't have to take the maser, because I'm not worried about I'm not worried that you're going to make the mistake in a similar case in the future. But in Dagan, I am worried that you'll make a mistake in a similar case in the future. I hope that clarified it. I feel I think this is the end of the sugya for us. And next time we're going to continue, and we're going to have another braita about somebody who's been stricken with bulmus, and I'll just read it for you. And well, I will read ahead. The Gemara here goes on and continues with some other cases about bulmus, right? So it says Tanu Rabbanam. The rabbis learned in a braita. Misha chazo bulmus, somebody was stricken by bulmus, machilinoto dabash, v'chomine mtika. We feed him, 1 second. We feed him honey and any or all kinds of sweet things. Shadvash v'chomine mtika mi'irin ma'ore nav shel adam, because honey and all manner of sweet things light up the light of the eyes of a person. And even though there isn't a proof for this thing, there is an allusion to this thing. From this pasuk in Shmuel, Ru'una ki oru einai, ki ta'amti ma'at hazeh. I would urge all of you to go and read that story. It's in Shmuel Aleph. Here, Shmuel Aleph Perek Yudal Chavtet. It's a great parak. It's a story that if you've ever
Yonatan, when Yonatan actually when no, go ahead.
Yeah, that's okay. No, you're right. I would urge you to go back and review the story. And it's Yonatan who does eat something on a day that his father made everybody swear that they wouldn't eat. And Yonatan declares that, look, that my eyes have lit up because I ate a little bit of this honey. And honey in the Bible, you probably know, refers to date honey, the technical point. The Gemara says, "My afa pishen rayala davar," and what is, in other words, what did the Braita mean when it said, even though there isn't a proof from here? It sounds like a proof, because he says, my eyes lit up when I ate this sweet thing. The hatam lav bulmus achse, because there he was not stricken by a bulmus. He wasn't literally held onto by a bulmus. Gemara goes on, Amar Abaye lo shanu eli achar achila. Abaye says they didn't learn this except after eating. Aval kodem achila, but before eating, migrar garir. It literally it drags along, but it means it will prompt or make somebody want to eat. Dichtiv, and then they bring another proof from a different pasuk, also in Shmuel Aleph from a different parak. And finally, Amar Rabbi Nachman, Amar Shmuel, Misha Chazel Bulmus Machinu Alya Bidvash. Somebody who is stricken with bulmus, you feed him the tail from a sheep in oil. And alya is the tail of a sheep, which is, I've never had one myself, but it's very fatty. The tail of a sheep is very fatty. Rav Huna bereder Rav Yeshua Amar, af solit nikiya bidvash. Rav Huna says even refined flour with in honey. Nikiya would mean that it's been sifted of bran. It literally means it's clean, right? But it's been sifted of bran. Rav Papa Amar afilu kimche desari b'divsha. Rav Papa says even barley flour in honey. Amar Rabbi Yochanan hamachat achazani bulmus. Rabbi Yochanan says one time I was overtaken by bulmus. V'ratzti lemizracha shel te'ena. I ran to the east of a date tree, of a fig tree. Sorry, te'ena, fig tree. V'kiyamti be'atzmi hachachma techayeh ba'aleh. And I fulfilled in myself this pasuk from Kohelet, that wisdom will make its owners live, right? Will give life to its owners. Titani Rav Yosef, like Rav Yosef learned from a Braita, Harotzeli Tom Ta'am Ta'ina, somebody who wants to taste the taste of a fig, Yifneh Mizracha, he should turn to the east. Shneamar Umimeget Tevuot Shamesh. Okay, so there's a lot that we need to unpack here, but these are all statements in regard to bulmus and how you take care of bulmus. We'll start to examine them next week. Bezrat Hashem. Okay, very good. Everybody have a good rest of your week, and hopefully I'll see you next week.
Thank you. Good night.
Erev Tov.
Bye.
Bye.